morning, everyone. My name is Dina Davis, the Senior Manager with the School and Community Supports Branch for Alberta Education. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's FASD webcast, Professionals Without Parachutes, part of a monthly series of webcasts on issues relating to FASD. This webcast is part of FASD Cross-Ministry Committee's initiative and 10-year FASD strategy to provide accessible educational sessions that cover a broad range of topics that are accessible to all Albertans. For more information about the series, check your emails for our regular updates or go to hslearningseries.ca or by following us on Twitter at AB Human Services. Today's webcast will cover the Professionals Without Parachutes training model. You will be able to pose your questions to our speaker via our live chat window. We will address as many of these questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Let's start off today's session with introductions. Our speakers today are Jacqueline Pye and Tracy Mastrangelo. Jacqueline Pye began her career in mental health as a forensic counselor, working with young offenders. Her current clinical and research interests include neuropsychological assessment and interventions for individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD. She is involved in projects that evaluate the unique neuropsychological profile of children and adolescents with FASD, as well as evaluating appropriate interventions for this unique population. Tracy Mastrangelo began her career in the social work field, focusing on working with high-risk youth in both assessment and treatment facilities. She is currently the provincial coordinator of the Wellness, Resiliency and Partnerships, or WRAP program. WRAP is an innovative program that aims to provide relationally based supports to students of vulnerable populations with a focus on FASD through a success coach model. Tracy also supports several FASD and education initiatives in the province, including acting as chair of the Northwest Central FASD Network. Eric Atkinson is our online moderator. He'll pose your webcast questions to our speakers. Today's session is also being recorded, and the video will be posted on Alberta FASD website about 2 weeks after the live session. Now, I'd like to hand it over to our presenters.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dina.
Thank you, Dina.
Good morning and welcome to Professionals Without Parachutes. We're really excited to be here with you guys today and tell you a little bit about this training initiative that we've had a lot of fun with in the past, 5 years or so.
I think we say 5, but it may have been 7.
I think we've been saying 5 for about 2 years now. So might be time to update the shtick. We'll see. So today, we're going to tell you a little bit about what got this initiative started, sort of the catalyst. We're going to tell you a bit about what it actually is, some of the core principles that are employed in the program or in the training. We'll talk about the pilot process, so how we piloted, gathered evidence, and evolved the approach. We'll tell you a little bit about where it's at now and how it's been evolving, and really the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of evolution, so we're excited to talk about that. And then we get to talk about going forward and what that looks like. So we're excited to share this story with you and engage in the conversation. And as you heard, there's questions at the end, and we love questions. We can talk a lot and go on and on, but really at the end of it, we really look forward to the kind of questions that folks come up with. So please write your thoughts down and tell us what you're thinking. So the catalyst, I'll start.
I think that's
Does it sound like a good plan?
I think that's good.
All right, awesome. The catalyst. When we started this initiative way back when, it actually began with us starting to say, what does it look like to provide meaningful supports to individuals with an FASD in school settings? This is where the conversation started. And myself and a colleague, Dr. Cheryl Poth, who isn't with us today, but who is a key partner in this initiative, we said, if we're going to start answering this question, we should probably start by talking to educators because really they're the experts of what goes on in the school. So we thought that was a fantastic idea and we felt pretty smart about that idea. So we brought in a whole group of educators who were all specialists in working with FASD within the school system. And we said to them, tell us about FASD. And they did an amazing job. Wow, did they ever provide a lot of information to us. Like, it was fantastic. So they told us that kids with an FASD may really struggle with language. They may get lost when we say, here's a lot of different steps. Cause and effect relationships might be something that's a little harder for kids with an FASD to put together. And this was fantastic. And I said, well, that's awesome. Like, you guys know what you're doing. I don't know what else we have to do. So then we just took it one step further and we said to him, so when you're in that classroom setting and Johnny decides to blow a gasket and things get a little crazy, how does that look? Like, how do you deal with that based on all the knowledge you have? And they said, well, you know, we would give Johnny a timeout and then tell him all the things he did wrong and talk about what he should do differently and walk through the steps of how to improve his behavior and really think about the cause and effect of his behavior. And we said, well, wait a minute, I thought you said that those are the things you shouldn't be doing. And we suddenly ran into this interesting moment where we said, how is it that individuals can have such fantastic head knowledge, understand a topic, and yet have a difficult time activating that in practice? Like, well, what's going on? And so that really got our interest and took us into a lot of the research. And in the course of reviewing research, we discovered that, hey, guess what? We're not unique. This is common, and it's a really common theme, that folks can fill their heads with a lot of information, but the kind of understanding that we get from that type of learning doesn't always translate well to how we do our day-to-day job. Because so often our day-to-day job is flying by the seat of our pants. So we don't have time to sit down and go, okay, how did that go again? What did that look like? And how do I have to respond differently? It takes too long to access that kind of complexity of information. So we said, well, wow. And the research further revealed that, you know, there are some real limitations in the way we're doing training right now across areas. So this is not unique to FASD. It's just in particular something that we found as well here, but that it's not unique. It's there in all areas of professional training. We also found when we started looking at the research and looking at the limitations that exist, that there's also real limits to professional-oriented training, and that the more you do training that is profession-specific, although that's sometimes very necessary depending on, you know, the expertise that you have within your profession, equally important, particularly for those who are working with complex population, is cross-professional training and training that isn't just geared towards how it works for one professional, like a social worker or an educator or a psychologist like myself, but rather training that also allows us to supersede or move beyond those professional barriers. To that end, one of the things that really emerged in literature is a movement towards what does it mean to meaningfully collaborate. So how do we actually begin to move towards collaborations where we bring teams together that are cross different professionals who are able to employ meaningful learning. So all of a sudden we're like, oh gosh, we just wanted to tell people about FASD, and now we discover that what we tell them doesn't mean it's going to affect their practice, and that we have to talk to more than one profession, and that it's got to include stuff about collaboration, and that there's also a necessity to consider the fact that in our day-to-day professions, the necessary aspects of collaboration and the related practice of reflection, which we'll talk a bit about today, are not usually provided time. And so we're like, okay, so we have to completely change the way we're thinking about training, and we have to think about the fact that what we're talking about training are things that aren't necessarily always built into people's work schedules. Pretty awesome,
That
really.
sounds like a lot of fun.
Right? Yeah, we were pretty excited, but you know, we thought, well, this is interesting. So how do we do this, and what does it look like? So we'll tell you our journey through that in a minute. First, what we want to do is tell you a little bit about how we ended up developing Professionals Without Parachutes, and then we'll talk about how we then started piloting the initiative. And this is where Tracy comes in, because Tracy does a lot of the collaborative work and a lot of the groundwork. And so when we started to realize we had these kind of questions, we're like, SOS, we need help, we need more people. And so Tracy and a number of her team with success coaches stepped in and said, oh gosh, we can help think about how this could look and what it might mean. And so together we came up with, well, what are the key principles that we think we need to have for any kind of training initiative. And that's where Professionals Without Parachutes started, was those key principles. And then as we piloted them, they've since evolved, and I'll present them in their evolved form, not their initial form. So I might be slightly out of order then, but we wanted to start with the principles so everybody knows what we're talking about.
It'll work.
Do you think so?
I hope so.
Well, we're gonna roll with it because we're collaborating with all these folks. That's what we do, which means, we figure out a way to work together. So in our principles, we really underscore the value of shared understanding, which we'll talk about first, collaborative practice, which I've already alluded to, and reflective opportunities, which I've also already alluded to. So these are the three kind of key pieces we said we really need to think about how we elaborate on these and what are our so-called hills to die on as we think about it.
Really, within shared understanding, if we wanted to start there, the first thing that we talk a lot about, and even in our initial meetings, we talked about all behavior is functional. And so making that shift from understanding the behaviors as willful to something of function. And specifically initially we were talking with educators and teachers, and so looking at what does that mean in the school system.
And even why is that important? And it was one of those things that became and has become, I think, one of the biggest core key understandings with PWP over time is if we can start from that premise, all behavior is functional, then in our heat of the moment, fly by the seat of our pants, maybe it allows us to reinterpret what we're seeing and respond differently, maybe. So this is, again, coming back to how do we think about understanding that changes our practice. So going from head knowledge to practice knowledge. So that was one principle that really has become fleshed out.
And it really stands out on its own, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
The second one that we talk a lot about that really fit in with the RAP coaches and the work that they were doing was that everyone can and deserves to experience success. So the idea that success for people with an FASD can be the same as success for people without an FASD, and that we can expect success, that we don't need to lower our expectations of whether or not they can actually be successful in their lives.
And that doesn't mean the same things are happening, it just means the same expectation for success. So how we define success can be different for people all over all walks of life, of course. How Tracy thinks success looks and how I think it looks is different. But we can both say we can similarly expect to succeed. We just define that differently, and that's fair. It's not like we give successive value and your success is more than this success, or, well, you'll succeed at this, but it's not the same as this. We do that. We add a lot of caveats when we define success sometimes. Well, I guess at least you're showing up to school, but wow, it would be nice if you could get the grades. No, showing up at school, if that's success, that's a success, blah, 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 blah. I didn't do enough Peter Piper today. But allowing success to be different but equivalent is what's a key piece there.
And then being able to recognize that success and celebrate it for what it is. The next goal or principle that we really talked about is the importance of shared goals. And so when we're working together in collaboration and when we've got multiple different players at the table, it's really not helpful for us to each have a separate set of goals that we're all trying to work towards, especially for our individual who is now bombarded with all of these goals. And so how do we, in our collaborative practices, then identify what is our goal and everybody on the team work together towards that shared goal so that we can experience success and achieve success.
Yeah. We always say, again, with these shared principles, if you don't like the output, change the input. And that applies to a team message. And that's where instead of saying who's at fault or who's to blame, it's merely a case of, okay, the outcomes aren't there. Things aren't happening. So how do we change what's going into that system to change those outcomes? And it allows us to move away from blame language. It doesn't mean we are relinquishing accountability and responsibility. You could still have those present. That can be part of the input into that system. But it's different than saying, well, if you'd have done this, this would work out. And that really is around some of that team building, but it's also around how we think about the behavior that we see. So, I mean, those 4 principles that we've just presented are 4 foundational pieces of professionals without parachutes. When we do a PWP session, we start kind of like we have just now. And so this is why we wanted to start with these principles, is because this is how we start with everybody we work with. We spend a whole day with folks, or sometimes 2, and the first thing we do is introduce ourselves and usually go on and on and on. And then we talk about those principles, because we want folks to know where we're going and what we want to talk about. And they form the heart of where the rest of the day goes and where the rest of the exploration goes as we define, enhance, and reflect on those pieces. We have some key things that we also like to do around collaboration and reflective practice.
So with collaboration, one of the key elements of the collaboration practice, collaborative practice principle, is establishing teams and roles. And so identifying for every individual that we're working with, who is the team, who needs to be on the team, and what are the roles of everyone that's on the team. When we're sitting around the table, we need to make sure that everybody that needs to be at the table is at the table. The other piece that Jackie and I talk a lot about is leaving our credentials at the door. And so if I come to the table and Jackie comes to the table, we're both coming to the table with a skill set, but we're both coming to the table equal partners and equal to support the collaborative process.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're in that equal place, then we can say we all have something to offer. What is that? And we can then begin setting goals. We can say, this is where we look to going. This is what we want to accomplish. The goals need to be realistic. And we think, how do we get there? When we work with folks with PWP, we spend a lot of time saying, let's make some groups. Let's put groups together. Let's look towards what it means to have a team, what it means to assign roles, and what it means to do really feasible goals. And goals that don't mean, oh, we'd like to see Johnny doing well in math. Well, that may not be a reasonable goal if Johnny's not even showing up at math class. We may have a ways to go before we get there. So we might say, well, okay, let's break that down. Let's spend some time with it. Let's try to understand a little bit about where Johnny's coming from and how we can support his success around the topic, around math. And so we really help to think about goal setting. We practice this and we engage in these activities with folks.
And again, it's really about moving away from that blaming one another. So sitting at the table and saying, well, if you had just done this, Jackie, then we would have actually seen success. It's really about how do we form together as a team and have equal players and equal partners. We use lots of metaphors, and often teams and sports comes into that as a metaphor for us.
Yeah, lots of times. Yeah, absolutely. Reflective opportunities. We like to provide folks with reflective opportunities. And so we spend time saying, well, what is an outcome? What's a meaningful outcome? What can success look like? How can this be a meaningful success for an individual? We ask a lot of questions. We invite folks to have conversations about those questions. We create the space and the time for us to be reflective as a group together, working through some of these ideas and thinking about what that means. We spend a lot of time talking about failure, actually, and we spend a lot of time saying that failure is important. Failure is important to any process of providing support to any individual, anyone at all, let alone a complex population like individuals with an FASD. We talk about the fact that being willing to fail means you're willing to try. And so using language like that and frameworks like that, we try to create safety around team building and collaborative thinking and idea generation that allows folks to maybe go in directions they hadn't before. So in a nutshell, I mean, when we're talking about all of these pieces, we're not probably saying a whole lot here to most of the folks listening that is real rocket science. I mean, we wanted to start with this stuff because we thought we want folks to know what are our hills here? What are the hills to die on, the really important pieces that house PWP? And you guys are hearing this and going, okay. And I think what is exciting about it is that really when PWP runs and when we get together, it's having those really unique and special opportunities to spend the time doing things that we maybe think sound okay in practice or sound like a nice idea, but we're busy and the time isn't there. And so sometimes when I'm trying to think of how to explain PWP to people, I say really it's giving us the ability to spend time. Spend time with ideas, spend time with each other, and spend time reflecting. And we don't usually get time. And so we do a lot of that. And we try to do that in the context of sharing information and as Tracy said, sharing information using metaphors and understandings that build on existing knowledge. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we continue to progress and talk about how we communicate sort of understandings maybe a little differently as well in light of these principles and with these kind of pieces at heart.
And with the end result that we go back to that first key principle, which is establishing a shared understanding. So that after a day or 2 days of Professionals Without Parachutes with us, the group has had opportunity to collaborate and build those teams and make those connections with other people in the room that might be in their community that they can call in when they need them. And we've given them opportunity to go practice that reflective practice and to do that have that chance. But really in the end, the big piece is that shared understanding, so that all of those people leaving that room that day have a shared understanding of what it is that we're talking about, how we can support these individuals, and how we can move forward.
Yeah, and that we can move forward. I think that's one of the big things is if we're going to move forward and we want folks to support individuals and if we want to seek success, then we have to believe that success is possible. And if we're not seeing success, if the outcomes aren't what we're looking for, then what do we do different? Not they can't be found. We don't give up on positive outcomes when we don't see them. We just think, okay, how do we get there differently? I mean, I'm a scientist at heart, and we don't just give up on something because we haven't figured out what it means yet. We don't say, oh, well, we're going to stop asking these questions because we didn't find the answers yet. No, we just continue to pursue other ways to explore those questions. And maybe that's part of what we're doing in PWP too, is just saying we have to open the door to the idea that, yeah, success can really happen. It's not about whether it can happen, it's about how it happens. And we spend 1, maybe 2 days talking about how can it happen and how can we equip folks to go forward and help that to happen. Because it's something we really believe in and really feel is supported, and feel it's supported in a lot of research as well. This little ARC model reflects sort of the process that we speak to and that we've already kind of talked to you guys about in those basic principles. But I like pictures because they make me happy. I usually use a lot of pictures, and I'm a picture kind of gal. So this is essentially the model in action, where we're saying PWP is really exchanging understandings that allow us to go forward, take action, reflect on outcomes, communicate and generate new opportunities, take action again, and keep trying and trying and trying and reflecting and communicating and trying. Again, not a new idea, not new concepts, but really requiring intentionality as we pursue them, and that motivation and belief that it's possible, and that if we do persist in this, that we can see success. Otherwise, it's hard to feel motivated. Okay, so that's the principles. That gives you the nutshell. Let's tell you the journey in PWP, and that's going to help flesh it out a bit more and maybe give folks even a deeper understanding of what it's all about. So, you want me to just keep talking?
I think that you should start this one, yeah.
You think so? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
because it really started with you.
Well, I don't know, sort of. In conversation, I guess. Yeah, I think we're just negotiating. It's still my turn. You know, they might be tired of my voice soon. Okay, so we piloted a new approach. And this is, as I say, early on, after we talked to Trace and we kind of came up with some of these key principles, we said, well, let's give it a go, because we really didn't know what we were doing. And so we ended up, first of all, in a high school in Edmonton, and secondly, in a rural community outside of Edmonton, and working with the two of us, another success coach, Dr. Cheryl Poth, who's amazing, and a grad student of ours, Stephanie Hayes, who's also
equally amazing.
Amazing as well. We went and sat down and spent time with educators, because at that point we were still focused on educators as kind of the the beginning of the initiative. And we had multiple meetings with educators and different sessions. And we said at that time that maybe what we need to do is kind of break the learnings up over time and do little bits of sessions so that we would see people over 3 months. So a couple hours here, a couple hours here, a couple hours here, because we just didn't know how to do this. And so we spent time, and our first session sort of consisted of getting to know each other, spending time chatting, finding kind of some safety and agreement in the idea that, hey, let's work together and figure out what it means to gain an understanding and a team mentality that allows us to do work differently. With the real understanding, shared understanding, that we're wanting to change practice, not just ideas. We wanted to see things happen differently. So so we sat down and we told everybody, we have no idea what we're doing. We just want to work with you guys and see if together we can generate sort of something that makes sense.
I think out of those initial processes and those initial sessions, when we first started, we didn't even have a name for this. So at that point in time, we were not professionals without parachutes. It was through the process with the first group of educators. It was actually that group of educators who at the end of the process named us and said, this is like professionals without parachutes. And it's kind of stuck. So that's where the title has come from.
It was really fantastic. And we kind of looked at them when we said, what, we're jumping out of planes and splashing down to the ground in bad ways? Like, you know, we interpreted that with some trepidation. And they said, no. They said, we're used to professionals parachuting in, dumping information on us, and walking away. And then we're left going, I don't know what to do with all of this. I'm overwhelmed, and going back to the way I've always done business because that was all I could do. And we're like, oh. And they said, you guys aren't dumping information. We're building together. We're doing something together. And that was kind of cool. And we kind of liked it. And we thought it was kind of a quirky name too, and that sort of appealed to us. So we said, hey, it'll stick. Hence PWP. That's where the name comes from. Really, we worked towards 3 sessions in those early models. And our current model continues to employ these same components, just a little bit tighter in timing. We start with FASD in the brain, and we talk about how the brain functions differently when an individual might be affected by FASD. We don't list deficits. We don't say, here's all the areas that are a problem. We talk about how the brain develops. We talk about how it develops uniquely. We talk about how it functions uniquely, and we talk a little bit about how the regulatory abilities of the brain function differently. We use a lot of metaphor to take the neuroscience and make it very accessible. We spend a lot of time talking about roads and comparing pathways in the brain to gravel roads versus paved roads, and those kinds of parallels. Looking to say we can enhance understanding best if we can build on what people already know. Let's not give them brand new information. Let's give them familiar information and allow them to apply it in a new way. And so that's only half the learning, and that means it's more accessible to rapid processing when I'm in the heat of the moment. I don't have to find a whole new vocabulary that I don't really understand. I can just think about the roads, which I experienced this morning on my way to work, and oh yeah, traffic jams, yeah, or that snowstorm really affected my ability to move. And if I can think about those things quickly and I have a means to apply that to a brain function, I can be more efficient. And so that's sort of where we started with our understandings session. The second session was more of a reflective session and a feedback session. That was,
We had taken also the ARC model in the first session and introduced that model to our educators. And then we had about a month and some homework. And the homework for the educators really was for them to do that reflective practice. And so we had question sheets and all kinds of homework sheets that they needed to complete for us, so that then we could come back on session 2 and start in that communication part of our process. So talking a lot about what did you see in the last month? How have things changed? Did things change? What worked? What didn't work? And we started to have opportunities where those educators were starting to share with one another strategies that they had been using actually for the same students, and they hadn't otherwise in a large urban school had the opportunity to really collaborate with one another to say, you know what, Johnny, we always pick on Johnny.
Apologies if your name's Johnny. I got nothing against it. It just falls out of my mouth.
Johnny was doing, you know, this is the behavior I'm seeing in my classroom, and other teachers say, oh, that's the behavior I'm seeing in my classroom. And so it was an opportunity to then say, well, you know what, I've been able to make a slight change to that behavior. I started doing this in my classroom differently, and now it's something, a strategy that all of the teachers could take. So really following that ARC model that we introduced in the first session, the second session was looking at that ARC model and how did we actually use it in the last month. And then we talked a lot about the INVEST model as well, and how to invest into the goals that we were setting to working with the individuals.
Yeah. The idea of INVEST is simply how do you track goals and outcomes. And so we spent time talking about goals and outcomes. I mean, really, we didn't know what we were doing. I continue to say that over and over again, but it's true, and I can't say it enough. But we went in and we just said, here, we're going to try a bunch of things. And then we said, come back and tell us in a month what's working, what's not, how's it working. And there are certain things we've stopped doing because over time people are like, yeah, this is not helping and this isn't working. But these things really are. For example, some of the accessible learnings are things that we're getting great feedback from. And even in these early sessions, I remember we had some really fantastic, exciting moments. And certainly for me too, as we developed it, I think we had a lot. But there was one, I'll tell the one, where we had one educator there, and he was not a big believer in what we're doing, but he was there and he was willing to give it a go, and that was pretty fantastic. And he described an individual, and I think it was a math class, who he was really struggling with. And she'd come into math, and this is a high school, and she'd kind of throw all her stuff on the ground and throw her head on the table and was kind of disruptive and clearly making a point that she didn't want to be there. And he would try a number of different things. He says, I've tried different strategies. I've tried talking to her nice. I tried talking to her harsh. I've said, hey, here's some work, here's some less work, here's more work, get to work, or do you want to work, or do you want to sit somewhere different in the class? And he said he tried these things, and every time it ends in her yelling and blowing up and him having to send her down to the office, and then she doesn't show up for the rest of the week, and things just essentially deteriorate. So she really was not in class, and he was frustrated, and he's like, yeah, I have no idea how this could work. So we said, oh gosh, I don't know either. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. This is hard. So we did a lot of the applied learnings, and away he went, and he came back a month later, and we're like, so how are things going? Well, he says, I was thinking about what you're saying, and I thought as she came into class that maybe in my brain it's paved roads and information moves pretty quick. But in her brain, perhaps we're dealing with gravel roads and that information's moving more slowly. So maybe even though she's in class, she's actually not yet at class. So he said, maybe what I need to do is actually just leave her alone and wait till she arrives in her brain and is ready to be here. And I'm like, cool. I didn't quite go there in my own head, but I love that you did. I love that you kind of went from that. And I said, so what happened? And we kind of waited with bated breath. And he said, well, after about 10, 15 minutes, she popped her head up and was happy and pleasant and did some worksheets. And I went over and chatted with her. He said it was fantastic. She's been in every class since. And I actually kind of like her, and she's kind of cool. Now, not all of our stories are like that, but that's part of why I love that story. And it was a story we got really early on, and it told us that, you know what, he got a nugget out of that really changed the way he saw her. His whole attitude and his whole ability to even make sense of her shifted. And as soon as he was able to think differently about her and interpret her behavior differently, and feeling that, it's well justified with science, which it is, but we sometimes need that, and then saw that kind of outcome. Like it was really neat that he was able to take it there, and it kind of said, well, maybe there's something to this, sort of how we can apply learning like this. So that's where we did in both of these communities. These are the two groups that we worked with. As part of this pilot, we tried to capture the impact. I mean, it was a pilot, so we were doing it with research. So we had meeting notes that we were collecting. We were recording sessions. We were doing summary notes. Our graduate student was taking notes. We did surveys. We had a number of tools that were developed or used during the course of the meetings that we got together. We had ethics to engage in the process, and we analyzed according to a number of different protocols. And do we have the same slide twice? That's good.
We'll just go through it and see.
Yeah, it's all right. I think I'm going to flip to this one. And then we came up with essentially, I think it's 5 key points that I'll mention here. I won't go through all of the data we have, although if folks have more questions, I'm happy to provide more detail. But some of the things that we got out of the early evidence from this pilot work was that teachers and educational assistants, we had groups, we had teachers, educational assistants, administrators, school counselors. We said anyone in your school who works with the population come. And so we were already kind of thinking the cross-professional, but we hadn't branched out beyond education yet. So there was evidence that they developed a better understanding of FASD. Some of the comments through different surveys and different information that was collected included things like brain not blame. This is a sheet, brain not blame. I'll show it to you guys, and at the end there's a link that you can download it if you want. The educators made this. A sheet that's been invaluable, a great resource. I've shared it with other teachers and parents. They built a resource based on the way they made sense of the understandings that we provided. And then we just, the grad student who understands how to do cool things in computers, she put it all into a worksheet format. I'm going to just flip ahead. There you can see it. Where they could download it, put it on the table, and use it as a conversation piece with folks they were working with. So it was a nice way that they were able to bring that to action. It was kind of cool. And
something I think that we still would be our most used tip sheet and tool sheet still now, 7 years later, that we use all the time.
Yeah, and people come to us all the time and ask, and they say it just helps us have a conversation that was a little different. It allowed us to start thinking about what the function of the behavior is so that we could better address the need. Because once we know what the function is, we can come up with alternative strategies to meet that need as opposed to just looking at how we can punish or suppress behavior. So it gave them a different kind of way to language it and work with teams. We found that teachers and EAs started really exploring strategies around supporting students. The quote, I'm thinking my goal is to have them feel success. My goal is to have them feel that they belong. There are days when my students are definitely not working, and there are days that I tell them the answers. And she goes on, and the quote I didn't put it all in there, but the idea that that's okay, because that's what they need when they need it. And the idea is that they're there and they're trying is more important sometimes than the idea that they're working independently. And so it was a shift in thinking that, oh, you have to do this all by yourself, to, no, as long as you show up and you're trying for this individual, that's a fantastic goal. And that's engagement, and that's what we want from that student.
And I think about some of the further engagement or signs. One of the things that we talked a lot about at that time was called ripple effects.
Yeah.
Because I still continued to be in the school, months and months later, and even the following year, I was seeing ripple effects from the sessions that we had done with Jackie and Cheryl and Stephanie. And so those were kind of neat. So the idea that one of the EAs, the education assistants, had decided that part of the importance of success, part of what needed to be done, was that everybody needed to understand these kids. So she started creating FASD success books and information pamphlets and booklets that she distributed to all teachers throughout the school. And she then became a resource in that particular school for FASD. So those kinds of ripple effects, or the ripple effects of conversations that were happening in the staff room that we hadn't planned, that were around how do we support the prevention of FASD. So some of those kinds of things that were really neat that we didn't anticipate, but a year and 2 years later even, we were seeing the effects of.
Yeah, which is exciting. We thought really exciting. We had reports for stronger collaboration and professional networks. We had folks who felt validated and really well supported in those networks. We saw more examples of advocacy. As you heard Tracy talk a little bit about one, we had a number of individuals report different ways that they were now conceptualizing their role with individuals within FASD, that sometimes were more to be an advocate and a communicator and a translator of what was going on, as opposed to somebody who was there to control or just manage behavior. So an educational assistant might say, I'm not here just to manage behavior, I'm here to interpret behavior. I'm here to communicate about behavior so that we can find success. So the language just changed, even the way what we had on the early when people came in versus what they were saying when they left. The words they were using were quite different. And that was also exciting because it reflects sort of a deep change in where you're coming from and your position, which changes the eyes you see people through. And that in turn really does influence that in the heat of the moment responding. We saw a lot more examples of reflection, communication, action. They were able to really articulate the way those pieces were coming out in their lives, in their practice. Even to have an educator say, the reflection was good for me. I'm not really good at reflecting on what I do, but I was able to say, yeah, I've calmed down a bit, and they in turn changed their behavior. Like, how cool for an individual to say, I'm the one that had to calm down, or I did, and now all of a sudden, the way I interact with this individual has changed, and able to recognize
That's
that
impacted the behavior.
yeah, like I needed to change my emotional valence. I had to bring it down a bit, and when I did, the outcome was the relationship improved with this individual. And I thought that's a strong reflection, and that's a brave place to get to, right? Because sometimes it's hard to say, gee, maybe I need to, bring it down a notch, and that'll, and that's hard to do. And folks were brave, and they were willing to kind of go out there and say these things. And I think that was really impactful for us doing this. It's like, wow, you guys are willing to take these risks and talk about even your own basic kind of shifts in thinking. Fantastic.
Very cool.
We also had another sheet, and again, we'll tell you where to find these because I know on the PowerPoints they're pretty much impossible to read, but we're related to the FASD educator and sort of levels of thinking and responding that they generated that they thought were important. So that was, yeah, I know. So that kind of takes you through the pilot. And really what happened is we did this pilot, as we said, because we didn't know what we were doing. We had some basic principles we wanted to figure out how to breathe life into. And we did it, and we ended up so excited by it that we couldn't leave it alone. And we thought, well, this has to be more than a pilot. This has to be something that we really build and do more of, because this is way too exciting and motivating for us. Purely on a selfish level, we thought, I need more of this because I'm learning and growing so much from the experience.
Work.
Yeah.
It's exciting work. So really, in our growth and evolution, as we've continued to grow, we've had a lot of opportunities, and fabulous opportunities, and I think that we often joke and laugh between the two of us about who would have guessed. Who would have guessed that this started in a coffee shop 7 years ago, talking about what could we actually do. To date, we have completed 16 sessions. We think they're
give or take
about maybe a few more. Yeah. Over 1,400 participants, and so again with that give or take piece, as the number in the last few days, we kept saying, oh, but did you remember about this session? Oh, that's more people. So really exciting to see. To see how this has spread and how the conversations are continuing. One of the things that we really emphasize in all of our sessions is that we want to collaborate with the people that we're talking with through PWP. And so we share our email addresses, and we say to people, please contact us if you've got questions or you've got cool ideas or cool things that have happened as a result of all of this. And we hear a lot from people that have been to our sessions, and we get a lot of great ideas that we're then able to share and pass along to other participants.
They take us up on it.
They do take us
they
up
really
on it,
do,
which is really cool.
Which is really cool. We've also diversified, and in that we mean, and really, I don't know how much of this was intentional by us and how much of it was actually just community generated. So there's so much back and forth in the PWP initiative. Sometimes it's hard to know where we got it and hard to know where it came from the community, because it is. It's so much of this is community developed. But there were folks that started to say, well, we want to bring our whole community together, and can we just bring everybody in our community who works with FASD to this? And we're like, sure, cool, why not? And they did, and we started having sessions, and you see a long list there, and I'm not going to read it all, but of folks that were showing up from all different roles, and boy, was that Cool. And people would say, well, I'm so frustrated with this. And they were, again, we had a safe environment and they were voicing frustration. And then somebody else would say, well, I actually work in that area and I hear what you're saying. And I wonder if we thought about it this way. And then they go, well, I don't know. And then we'd like, okay, let's get some groups going and let's try to problem solve here. How can we work through some of these barriers? And folks started doing really cool things and folks were connecting and somebody would say, well, I'm really new to this and I kind of feel isolated and people are like, oh, I'll talk to you, I'll have coffee with you and I'll meet and hey, did you know this? Or I'm moving to a new community or I'm moving into your community and people are like, oh, how can we welcome you? Like
I'm going to be your new social worker. Great. So those kinds of opportunities, right? That are building.
People, when you give folks the opportunity, it's amazing what people can do. If you open the door to say, hey, let's just start having fun and think and imagine possibilities, and you open that door and create safety, I don't know, I am learning so much, and I'm so excited about what folks have to offer. So as we continue to go forward, we always are collecting data because, well, seems that's what I do in my life. And thankfully we have, like I say, Dr. Cheryl Puth involved and her specialty, in addition to being an educator, she's also specialized in evaluation and how do we collect meaningful information. Thank heavens. So she keeps us honest. But as we've kind of started reviewing data and without making this a real data heavy presentation, I just want to say that there are 3 really key themes that have emerged in our second sort of stage of looking at information, and I think we've kind of refined our understandings from those pilots to kind of really begin to get a little bit more at the heart of what's going on, and that's taken us to 3 core themes: that building conditions for relationship, co-creating learnings, and activating hopeful attitudes. That's kind of in a nutshell what we think are kind of the 3 key pieces. When we talk about building conditions for relationship, there are some key components to that come out and that folks talk about and identify as being important to those conditions for relationship.
In all of our sessions, we spend a lot of time. If we did a full day session, we would spend the majority of the morning really focusing on building those relationships. And there's a lot of kibitzing back and forth between the 2 of us, and our relationship becomes very, very evident and open. And we invite the people, the participants, to have those same relationships with us, and we spend a lot of time in the morning building those relationships and really focusing on who is everybody in the room. Instead of just having 2 groups, the presenters and the participants, we really break it down further and say, how many social workers do we have in the room? Oh wow, where are you a social worker? How many caregivers do we have in the room? Oh wow, and do any of you know each other? And okay, so what part of the province are you from and where are you from, so that we can help make some of those collaborative relationships and start making those connections for people. Which is always interesting and makes it a bit more fluid. One of the things we didn't have on the other slide, and I just thought of it when you're talking now, and it's worth noting, is other participants that are there are individuals who are affected by FASD. We've had a number of individuals affected by FASD present at different PWP sessions, and they can be absolutely fantastic contributors, and they've had a lot to offer. So certainly that, when we talk about team, when we talk about collaboration, one of the team participants we often talk about is that individual who is affected by FASD and how they play a role on the team and how important it is that they play a role on that team. And so that's a really big part of that relationship as well. We try to do what we can to allow folks to be reasonably vulnerable, to take risks in their thinking, and establish relationships that can be maintained. We try to move beyond the, oh, hey, nice to meet you, let's have coffee one day and never talk again. We try to say, what is that critical threshold for interaction? Where do you have to get in a day or 2 days that leaves you with the confidence, the motivation, and the desire to follow that up again? Because there is a point, there's a threshold where you leave something, you say, I cannot wait to talk to them again. Mm-hmm. And then you do. And then there's that motivation and there's that ability to take those next steps, as opposed to, well, that was kind of a cool idea. Maybe I'll think about it again one day when I have time, maybe.
We've talked a little bit about creating safe and respectful environments. We really embrace creative ideas and creative approaches to thinking. We also like things to be really substantive. Today we're talking a lot about hope and success and collaboration, and wow, these are words that are sometimes really, frankly, kind of airy-fairy and overused. But I don't always know what else to say without going on and on and on. But what we do try to do is be really substantive, and we say we also need to talk about where the rubber meets the road. And we have to talk about the real issues, and we have to come up with real ideas and real solutions or real approaches that we can incorporate, not just, oh, this sounds like some generalized nice idea. So substantive is pretty critical.
And a part of that is identifying and acknowledging that this is really hard work. That the people that we have in the room who are supporting those with an FASD, whether they're a caregiver, a speech and language pathologist, a psychologist, it's hard work. And so we really identify with that piece and have a conversation in that safe way, and when we've taken people to this vulnerable place to say, now self-care is extremely important. And again, it's one of those airy-fairy things that people in our professional worlds talk a lot about, but are not always the very best at implementing. And so we have those conversations about what are you going to do tonight, and who in this room can help you be accountable. So I think that's another piece that we really talk about in making it a safe place.
Agreed.
That's convenient that you agree.
Yeah, it's lucky, isn't it? Because well, I don't always. A couple of quotes that reflect some of these things. A group that say we put together a little table community to share information, ideas, thoughts, successes going forward. So this is from one of the sessions where folks actually said we're like going to be a little community, and they exchanged information and they figured out how they were going to continue working together. They actually developed their own little process of, I think they were connected, they created some online something right there in the session, and have continued to work together since. And that's their little community. So it started there, and they're doing what they're doing, and how cool is that? We had folks talk a lot about moving forward in collaborative ways, and really looking at common language to make changes, which is really neat ideas to come from. How do we talk in the same way to move things forward?
Right. So really looking further, we at the beginning with basic ideas and familiar understanding. So really with that being our starting place, with all of our PWP sessions, we have things like communities of practice being created and people changing their shared language. We focus on facilitating connections in the room. Often I joke that that Jackie is the bouncer at the door that doesn't let anybody leave until they can show that they have contact information of someone they didn't have before they came into the room.
Super believable.
Very believable.
Very
yeah.
believable.
Yeah.
But these processes allow us to co-create learning. And this is really critical. Like, we begin, as Trace said, with these basic understandings, these basic ideas, but we're not there to tell people how to do their business. We're there to share some information, but the sharing is just a two-way street. And so there's this constant process of co-creation, of idea generation, of how do we take this to somewhere we couldn't even imagine. I mean, I haven't yet been in a PWP where I haven't had a moment where I went, I never thought of that before. Like, it's awesome. My world is always being rocked. I mean, there's a lot I haven't thought about. I'm not sure what it says about me. But anyway, digression. As Trace said, we facilitate connections, encourage extension. Take these ideas. You know, we talked about the educator who said, oh, maybe she's just not in class yet. He kind of extended. He took some idea that made sense to him and extended it. People come back and they say, well, you guys use this metaphor, and then when I was looking at this behavior, I thought, gee, it kind of looks like this or what, and they extend these metaphors. And I'm like, that's not a bad extension. That's kind of a cool idea. What a neat approach to take. Why not? And so it's like people kind of feel that they're more confident and even competent generating new ideas based on sort of this understanding that they have, which I think is super exciting.
And the end result is that we've created some transferable knowledge. So information that people leave at the end of the day and feel like they can actually share this information. They can take the metaphors of the road and the gravel path, the gravel roads and the paved roads, and they can actually use that to help build a further community of practice with a shared understanding. So I think that that's a pretty cool thing. When we've had people contact us afterwards and say, you know, I was in a meeting last week and I shared your gravel pathways, and people in the meeting got it, and it helped us be able to collaborate and work together to come up with some cool ideas and cool plans to support this individual.
Folks tell us analogies allow me to have better way to share information. We're told over and over again that understanding is increased. That the science becomes more accessible, which allows folks to feel more competent responding to those brain-based needs. Because otherwise it sometimes feels like, well, I can't deal with the brain, but I can sure manage the behavior. Well, no, actually they're the same thing. And so how do we make sense of that? And the idea that information is tangible, like we keep it really accessible. The important piece of the information, I mean, we maintain scientific integrity as needed, but really the importance is not that we understand or communicate every little detail. The important piece is that we give sufficient information that allows us to go out and do work differently and then monitor those outcomes and see where success occurs. And it's occurring, it really is. Which takes us to our hopeful attitudes, which is kind of a happy piece for me.
So one of the hopeful attitudes that we've had reoccurring come through that evaluation process is the idea of people moving that to the idea of success being possible. That story that these people with an FASD can have success, and it's not always a doom and gloom kind of a story.
And so motivating. I mean, people who show up and are like, yeah, I'm kind of doing this because I have to. And then we start talking about the fact that, you know what? I am capable of contributing. I can do things. Me, the professional I am, I can have an impact. I can contribute to this team in a way that may lead to positive outcomes for that individual. Change is possible. I can be part of that change, and I can begin to see a goal that might make sense for all of us. Those are motivating pieces, people. I mean, it is hard to show up to work if we think, yeah, I'm not really able to contribute anything and nothing good's going to come of it anyway, and what's the point because it's all kind of going down the tubes anyway, or we're just kind of doing the best we can to minimize how bad it's going to be. Those are hard reasons to show up and frankly not well supported in the research. We see evidence now increasingly that good things and positive outcomes can happen. When we see hopeful, we're not saying easy. We're not saying, hey, welcome to the yellow brick road of easiness here.
Here's the magic wand.
Yeah. We in fact let everyone know that the magic wands are checked at the door. This is hard, and there will be heartbreak, and there will be tears, and there will be days that are tough. And that's part of why we spend so much time talking about self-care and teams that work together well and safely. But we also say there will be success, and you can find those successes, and we can work towards those. And there's evidence that success is a possible endpoint. We just need time and patience and persistence, and we're getting there. And we're getting better at getting there. And we're getting better at even recognizing when we're there and saying, wait a minute, we almost missed the success. Because we had so many goals, we almost missed the one that was successful. So we're starting to slow it down and see those goals and pick out those successes.
And so what we're hearing from people is that they are hopeful. That they're hopeful, but they're realistic. And so when we're setting these goals, we're setting realistic goals, which is then creating the hopefulness. That people are then able to focus from that real deficit-based, where we see the behavior as a problem and the child as a problem and all of the concerns, to making that strength-based approach. And so again, this is one of those things that we talk about in theory, strength strength-based approaches, the same as we talk about collaboration and theory, but how do we actually put it into practice, and what does that actually look? And so we're hearing back from people that this model and the work that we've been able to do with them is helping them shift that perspective and helping them shift that model that they were using otherwise.
And we're able to talk about the strong research body and the growing research body out there that identifies strengths as an optimal source for intervention strategies and approaches. Meaning we will typically see the best success when we identify and capitalize on an individual's strengths and possibilities. When all we see are the deficits or the problems, then we're just always trying to mitigate problems, which never puts us in a position to build and create alternatives. When we think behavior is functional, when we think build on strengths, then what we're doing is carving out pathways to an alternative future that has success and possibility aligned with it. So we also have a couple of examples, sort of case studies we wanted to pull out as we pull this together, a couple of long-term impacts. I mean, we've described a couple as we've going on because we are storytellers, and it's been all I can do to rein it in to this extent.
You've done well.
Yeah, it's been really hard. Like, this is a short little session. We're not used to having to, be like condensed. But here's a couple of case studies.
So we use Johnny, and so again, sorry for the Johnnies of the world. We have one in the room today.
Well, maybe it's not a story. Maybe it's like a flat. Like, this is fantastic.
We tried once to change it up from Johnny to, I think we used Matthew or something, but then it didn't work because we
I
just
got
went
confused.
right back to Johnny.
And then people are like, "Who are we talking about now?" And it got confused. And I'm so sorry.
So we recently had a team. It was in a larger session, and we had a school team join us. And so amongst that session, and it was right from the student services director to occupational therapists and speech and language assistants and educators, classroom and teacher assistants. And so through this process, they took a student and went through the ARC process through the day with that student, and used that as an example. So Johnny, what they came back and told us was that they really were able to look at that pyramid of support, and first looked at universal support. So what could they put in place from a school-wide perspective based on the knowledge and understanding that they had learned that day, mainly around behavior is functional and the pathways in the brain and all of the brain function pieces. So how can we then universally use that in our school that will support all students, and what kinds of procedures can we put in place to do that?
Yeah, and moving to increased use of visual versus just word cues in their school. Saying, hey, can we put up more little visual indicators? So if it works well for an individual with FASD, it will work for everybody. So why not adjust some of our universal strategies to something that might be accessible by our kids with an FASD? They said, can we do this lunchtime Lego club? He really liked Lego, and use Lego as a means to help him to communicate and stay calm and work through things. And when he got frustrated with the Lego, how can we use that as an opportunity to say, okay, let's put the Lego down, how do we regulate, and then how we come back. So instead of making it around math, which was already inherently frustrating, let's make it around Lego, which is kind of good. And then you're still going to experience frustration, but then we can practice that. So it's practical, and we're starting to say that maybe more important than math all the time is your ability to begin calming yourself down and develop a few strategies to calm down. So let's do it with the Lego. How cool is that? I really think that's such an awesome idea.
They also looked at how could they increase opportunities for proactive breaks. And so this little guy was getting frustrated. The days were long and the mornings were long, and so he was having some struggles and some meltdowns. So they looked at how could they actually proactively put some scheduled breaks in the day for all of the kids that would help this student as well, which is
well, and proactive, and they said this. It's important it's proactive, because otherwise you wait till they're already kind of at the end of their rope, and then it feels more like you're in trouble or it's a bad thing. Whereas when it's scheduled, you're continuing to just make it part of the day. It's like, oh, and it's break time, and it's stretch time, and it's this. So it's teaching a strategy that fosters, kind of pro-social behavior or things that you're hoping to see that isn't tied to or in any way linked to a problem. it's just giving opportunities to kind of reduce that tension valve before you even need to.
And then that structure ended up being kind of a motivational piece and a reinforced piece for the good behavior and the positive behavior that they were seeking, but otherwise weren't seeing because they were in a position where they were reacting to the negative behaviors.
Just shift the game and move into that just really cool.
So we came back to this group recently and said to them, what are the outcomes? What were the outcomes? What have you seen? So you came out of that day with a whole plan of what you were going to do going forward, and how did you do that, and what did you see? So they talked to us about that they went with their plan back to the school and shared it with everybody that needed to be on that team. So they built that collaborative, extended that collaborative team from the school district kind of level to the school level, and talked about how can we all play a role and what are we going to do, and shared some really incredible outcomes. One of the things that they told us is that through this process, everyone on the team began to be able to identify the strengths for the student, and that otherwise this might not have been something that they were looking at. And so being able to identify those strengths, Jackie's already talked about building on strengths and the science and research that supports that building on strengths really is the best opportunity for success for students.
And their language then, because they identified it and because they were seeing the students through, or this particular student, with that strengths lens, then they were able to recognize, identify, and respond to those. That's an entirely different way of interacting with a child. You think of how you interact with somebody. If you think, oh, that jerk, you're going to kind of have your entire interaction colored that way, versus, wow, Johnny's really trying today. That's going to change the way I interact with Johnny. That's going to change the tone and the feeling of that interaction. Seeing Johnny that way is going to allow Johnny to see himself that way, because kids see themselves in our eyes, right? So there's that mirror effect. So the more we see those strengths, the more they can begin to see those strengths. It's a huge shift.
And from putting in things in place where they were proactively making these approaches and attempts, Johnny started to really experience some control and some calm, and started being able to build even further on the strengths that had been identified. And they actually determined out of this that academically Johnny was really quite strong, and that it was actually all of the other things that were getting in the way of him being successful in school. So through that, they were able to identify a specialized program for Johnny and implement it, and they were excited to share with us that he's experiencing success today in his new program and his new environment, one that fits him for his needs. So that's pretty.
So now he can pass classes and build bigger Lego structures.
Right.
It's like a win-win.
That gives me shivers.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. A second example is from a school district that we worked with, and it was a little bit different. So it was where we had actually 2 school districts in a community came together, and we did problem solving and work with PWP with them over a period of time. And it wasn't specific to a given student. It was for a district, or across both districts, I guess. Yeah, and they wanted to think about how do they come at this from a more system level approach. And so completely different way to think about it, completely different way to come at all of these same principles. And again, some really neat outcomes.
So again, what we have heard, and this session that was done with these 2 school districts was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And so what we've heard is that information has continued to play a part in the way that they approach students with an FASD in their schools. They talked a lot about the myths and beliefs that people otherwise had about FASD that were more around the deficit-based and the problems and the concerns idea, that they've been able to change those, the idea that staff had about the students' behavior. So making that shift for the staff so that they looked at students through a different lens.
Mm-hmm. And consequently seeing combination of staff frustration reduced, and instead more understanding, compassion, and empathy. So staff were no longer saying, oh, I can't do this, I don't like my job, I'm not happy doing this, to, you know what, I think we're doing okay, and oh, I'm really kind of feeling for my students right now, and I'm concerned for them instead of I'm angry with them. And seeing that as having some really positive impacts on simply staff well-being and how staff see themselves and view themselves within the school district, which is, it was an outcome that we're actually thinking about how to go forward measuring it, because we just recently got some of this kind of long-term follow-up data, and we're like, we haven't actually done a lot of evaluation around the well-being and impacts, I guess, to how we see ourselves as professionals after we start to see success or a shift in some of the things that are happening. So we've spent a lot of time looking at outcomes that are more student-based or school-based or policy-based, and we haven't spent a lot of time looking at professional outcomes. So that's something that this twigged, and we're going to kind of add in as we go forward.
So the really big piece too is looking from an entire school division and a specific school that was really involved at how do we change our policies and procedures within the school so that our expectations for students with an FASD change as well, so that we can be a more supportive environment. So that's another big piece.
Yeah, they were doing some neat things. And as we said, looking forward, as that's kind of where PWP is to this point. It's growing and it's evolving, and we're just getting increasingly excited, and the more data we collect and the more outcome information we get, the more excited we get. And that said, we're constantly evolving and tweaking the approaches that we use. We're looking forward to continued opportunities to work with communities and to continue to build sort of these more solution-seeking mentalities and these approaches and ways at seeking success. We're in the process of putting together a website, finally. We've been talking about this for a while, so that we can make sure that these shared understandings and materials and things are available, and folks can say, well, what is this all about, and how can we access this, and what does it mean? Because we talk a lot about communication. We want to make sure we're communicating, we're accessible. Our emails are fine, but we also want to make that more transparent and really create more opportunities for folks. With that, we're also going to be putting in more embedded evaluation using some of that website and a few other things that we're going to be doing. Yay, Cheryl. Yes, she rocks. Because we want to continue, as I said, evolving the approach. We recognize that, as with any emerging approach to doing things, there's always going to be need to tweak and respond to the evidence that arises. And we want to always be responsive to evidence and recognize that we can always do better, and we can always improve, and we can always evolve our approach. And that ultimately, we need to have a clear idea of what these kind of positive outcomes can look like, and how closely on track we are to accomplishing those. And data to date has been really positive and really exciting and very motivating for us. But doesn't mean that there isn't still a lot of work to do, and we're excited to continue evolving.
And I think some data that we haven't even captured yet, that we're not even aware yet. And so I think that's where Cheryl coming back to us is an important piece of being able to capture and grab those pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yay. It's always good to ask.
So more information. We wanted to offer our email addresses in today's session, the same as we do in all of our Professionals Without Parachute sessions. We will have opportunity for questions here in just a moment, but if there's ideas or thoughts that come to you later in the week, then you're welcome to contact either of us, and we would happily respond. As Jackie said, our website is coming out, so this is very exciting for us. We have a website address, www.professionalswithoutparachutes.com, and that website will be going live, I think,
End of July.
So keep checking, or send us an email and we'll let you know.
Yeah, that might be easier.
Yeah. We had the opportunity last year to work together with Alberta Education and Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium and develop a set of videos. You can find those on engagingalllearners.ca.
Those videos will give you a little bit more of an idea of what we talk about when we say metaphors. So we're referring to metaphors, and in the interest of time, we obviously didn't provide any of those. But there are 3 little videos, about maybe average of 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes in length, that provide some of those metaphors and analogies that explain the way the brain works. And those videos are used in conjunction with PWP and our resources that are produced, but They're there for if you want to have a conversation with somebody, if you're looking at a way to make sense of something and you're working through it together. They're there for conversation starters. They're there for us to begin sharing our understandings and building our teams together. And that's sort of the idea. They'll eventually be linked to the Professionals Without Parachutes website, which will help sort of contextualize them within this networking, collaborative, team building framework, which is so critical. But sometimes we just need the right kind of language bits that allow us to begin having a meaningful conversation. And so a lot of folks who have attended PWP have said that having access to those videos has allowed them to say, okay, now I can share that and communicate with that, and we can problem solve using those. So you're welcome to have a look at those. And I think that's us for now.
That's it.
Except for perhaps questions. Eric's like, uh-huh.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions that have come in.
Awesome.
The first one is, if we want sessions presented at our workplace, do we contact you directly?
Yes. Just send us an email. We'd love to hear from you and have a conversation for sure.
The next question is it possible to become a PWP presenter in another province?
Oh gosh, you know what? That's a fantastic question. And we've actually been thinking about it because we're thinking about how do we expand and grow, and that's really a big goal. And we've actually were invited and spent some time in New Zealand doing PWP as well. And they've come back to us with the same question. And they've said, what can we do to manage this model on our own? So I didn't put that in there because I actually forgot. So awesome question. Because it's something that we want to think about is how do we bring people in and have them do some of this and then roll with it, because we do want to create more opportunities to expand the way that we're sharing this. So have that individual, whoever you are out
Yes.
there,
Contact us.
and let's start having some conversations about how these things could look.
Have you encountered faculty or administration that is resistant, perhaps because of lack of understanding, to making the necessary environmental changes to support students with FASD? And if so, what approaches do you recommend or use to best interact with that resistance?
That's a hard question.
Yes. I would say yes, we have.
Absolutely.
And I think that in both of our, in our other worlds or other jobs, other work that we're doing outside of Professionals Without Parachutes, we both have experienced that. Again, I would say that starting at that shared understanding for all individuals has been the area where we've seen the most success.
Yeah, I think when we have resistance, I think the first thing is I find when there's resistance, when somebody's hesitant, when somebody's kind of, this is a problem, going head to head and saying, well, you've got it, usually just increases the resistance and you just get more force and more pushback. And so rather than creating that kind of conversation, we tend to work around it and say, well, first, let's just say, where can we get in terms of having a shared understanding? So let's not even worry about the administration right now. Let's walk away from this conversation, get to that shared understanding, and then instead of saying, why can't you, or we need to do this, or you need to do this, instead we say, here's our shared understanding. How do we do this? I understand that there's difficulty. I understand we have challenge. How could it look? You could sometimes still get resistance, and I mean, there's sometimes it's just really, really hard, and it takes a lot of just collaboration, troubleshooting, and other days just long hot baths. Truly, was that out loud? That wasn't it again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not while you're collaborating.
No, not while you're collaborating. But I do find that when I approach things with, first, can we just get to a point where we sort of have a shared sense of what's going on? Like, where can we find one nugget of information somewhere in this whole kind of tension that we actually agree on? Let's find that point. And then from that point, can we start talking about how? Not if and who and what, how. And then maybe that allows us to nourish a little bit of growth and set those expectations accordingly. Sometimes you got to take a tiny little bit as an awesome thing, knowing that maybe a tiny little bit could lead to a little bit more when success speaks. But I think part of it is avoiding the head-on, working to the shared understanding, and using questions like how to engage a conversation as opposed to create conflict, and just persistence and good support people to kind of be there when you're frustrated.
And I think I would add on to that there's almost two conversations or two levels that I hear in this particular question. One is that systems level, and so how do we approach and help that shift of the system that our administrators oversee in a school. And the other is how do we support students with an FASD. And I think that there's two very different approaches that we take for both of those challenges. And one as a systems level, I'm not sure that necessarily has to shift in order for our practices as frontline staff, whether you're an educator or an education assistant, to put in some supports and some practices in your personal practice to support students with an FASD.
Our next question is, what is the connection between the RAP project and PWP? What is the role of RAP success coaches in PWP?
That's an awesome question. And I mean, it started out in the pilot that it was a partnership between the university and RAP. PWP is now distinct. It's neither one or the other, and so it's something that kind of operates informed by the organizations, but it's no longer housed within RAP or the university. So it's sort of its own entity, but the pilot and the initial ideas began in that partnership. Is that a fair way to say it?
I think that is a good fair way.
Was that a good fair
That was
way?
a good fair way. I think the next
Awesome.
piece is that the model and the conversations that we have throughout Professionals Without Parachutes are deeply embedded within the work that success coaches from the RAP project or RAP program are using daily in their practice. And so they're all very well vetted at using these kinds of models and leading collaborative teams and building collaborative teams in the schools that they are supporting. Success coaches in their schools or in their school divisions are often asked to lead some of those collaborative practices through conversations that they have with other staff in their schools around the students that they're supporting. And so sometimes they will use tools like the videos on engaging all learners to start those conversations and continue those conversations so that the schools that they're working in or the districts that they're working in are all coming from the same shared understanding so that they can then employ that ARC model. So I would say that kind of is the relationship between the two. Yeah.
Our next question is, who can use the PWP material? Is there any copyright or any restrictions on how they use that material?
Yeah, the videos can be used within sort of conversation. The name PWP is of course a copyright and protected name. And so certainly somebody who says I've had a PWP training or I've been to PWP would be speaking to a copyright model and approach. The resources that are produced by PWP, like the handouts and the videos, if you're having a conversation with somebody, you're welcome to use those. If you are doing something else through your own organization and you want to draw attention to these as conversational resources, you can certainly point towards them as that conversational level. And so the resources and the materials we do put out there as available, but we do say that that's certainly not the PWP approach in its entirety. Those are resources to be used as a catalyst for conversation and to support and nurture conversation, but a small part of the entire PWP philosophy and approach. So separating the resources from the actual PWP model.
This next person is just looking for clarification on where the videos can be found that you mentioned.
I think we've just got it up right now.
Yeah.
It's engagingalllearners.ca.
And then search FASD.
Once
I think
you
you
get
have to.
onto
I think
that.
once you get onto that site, there's a lot of stuff, so it may not be right there. So search FASD. And if you're having no luck and you're like, I can't get them to come up, email us and we'll
you a
send it
direct
to you.
link.
Yeah, we'll give you a direct link. But there should be, once you get into the Engaging All Learners, you should be able to access them. And as we said, we'll also have them linked in and embedded in the website when we have the Professionals Without Parachutes website available.
For this next question, can you speak to what challenges people most frequently identify as barriers to best practices?
Oh gosh, so many things. Sometimes the challenges are individual, the actual behaviors or presentation of a given individual is sometimes something that people feel very challenged by. Sometimes people feel challenged by the context, the situation they work in. I guess, I don't know, Tracy, if you'd agree.
I think sometimes
but-
I would say absolutely, and
Yeah.
then I think that sometimes the challenges that are expressed or shared with us are those big system challenges.
Yeah.
And so how do we work around things like diagnosis, and what does the diagnosis
Yes.
piece mean, and
Yeah, it's a
and
big
how
one.
do we go about those processes of making referrals and who can make a referral? So, and then how do we get other professionals at the table having a shared understanding? So I think that from a big systems level, those would kind of be the challenges that are coming up for us. From a smaller individual or more focused level, absolutely. I mean, behaviors come up regularly,
All the time.
and they are always slightly different depending on the individual. But those kinds of challenges come up.
But I think you're right. I think probably the ones that remain the biggest challenges, even for folks, is continue to think how to navigate, negotiate system level barriers. Even the question we had earlier from that person who I talked about resistance and people who aren't as open to saying, let's talk about something new. I think those are probably the most persistent things that folks really feel that takes a lot of work to begin coming up with ways to be successful in the face of sort of folks that are not perhaps as engaged in a collaboration or a willingness to think a little differently. I think that's maybe one of the, because once we start talking about behavior differently, folks really reframe that and are able to kind of move beyond that. But then when it's the system level stuff, I think they feel more powerless to have an impact. And I think as with any kind of motivational piece, when we feel like we're competent and we're capable to contribute, we're more motivated and happier. And when we're feeling that we're more powerless so that we really can't make a difference, and sometimes at system levels it feels that way, it remains more of a challenge and more frustrating. I mean, that's kind of working it through as I'm talking about it. It's a good question. It's a really good question. Yeah.
This will be our last question. What has been your biggest learning experience through Professionals Without Parachutes?
Oh gosh, we should both answer this. I want to know what you say. I think mine has been how many different ways there are to think about things. I am so excited by the examples and the scenarios and the feedback we get by people. And I just can't believe that how many times I've just never thought of that, or had a moment where I went, like, that has been just a huge learning for me, is how much learning there is to do, and how much wisdom there is in the community, and folks' ability to really generate ideas and approaches. It's just very exciting to me. And so that's been a huge learning, I think. I mean, I was excited. I just didn't think it'd be so huge.
Right. I'd like to just say ditto, but I'll add. I would say, adding on to that piece, it would be Jackie and I have the opportunity to take Professionals Without Parachutes to a certain level and to a certain place. But it's fascinating to me hearing back from people a year later, a month later, about where other people that have been part of Professionals Without Parachutes are able to take the work, and the things that people are doing with this that blows my mind, those conversations that are happening kind of post PWP, once they leave the room. So for me, it would be all of what you said, and then moving on.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our presenters, Jacqueline and Tracy, for taking the time to present on the Professionals Without Parachutes training model. Stay tuned for information on next month's FASD webcast. To get updates and registration information about each of the sessions, please email us at fasd@gov.ab.ca and ask to be added to our mailing list. You can also find past and future webcasts at http://fasd.alberta.ca or sign up at hslearningseries.ca. Today's webcast was recorded and the video will be posted online, along with videos from all the previous webcasts. The video link will be sent out to all registrants in the near future. We encourage you to share the video with anyone you think may be interested. If you have feedback about today's webcast, please email us at fasd@gov.ab.ca and let us know. You will also be receiving a feedback email from us. Please take the time to let us know what you thought of today's webcast. We'd love to hear your ideas. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you next month.